Welcome to Interview with an Astronaut. I'm your host, former journalism student, but mainly Mass Effect N7 certified gamer, streamer, and space fan, Desmond Dickerson. And my guest joining the conversation today is a native of Houston, Texas. Her hobbies includes running, weight training, cooking, travel, and apparently eating candy in zero gravity. She she is an astronaut, cosmonaut, with also over 300 days in space, including 2 trips to the International Space Station, the latest of which was on the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Shannon Walker.
Hello,
Nice to
everyone. So nice to be here.
Thank you again for making me feel like a kid again. Like I said earlier, my 10-year-old self is jumping up for joy and whatnot. So going back to the candy thing, I don't know if you remember that picture.
Is it
But
one? Oh, I don't know which one you're talking about. Refresh my
I
memory.
can I can put it up on the screen real quick. That particular one.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good one. Yep.
So I was debating on what actual candy is that one? Was that Skittles or M&Ms or like what's the story
It
behind that?
it was M&Ms. Yep, it was the chocolate coated candies as we call it at NASA, but essentially the same thing.
So is that part of your go-to bag? Your go-to
Um,
essentials when you get ready to leave?
Well, it's no, it's one of these things where the ground likes to send us up treats when they can. Whenever we get cargo ships to come up, they usually try and put some special treats in it for us because the food we have on the space station is good, but we don't have a whole lot of variety. So over 6 months, you get kind of tired of eating the same thing, even though it's good food. So if they can sneak up, like sometimes we have some freezers that come up that will need to take frozen science back to the ground. So maybe they'll stick some ice cream in there for us. And in this case, they managed to stick a bag of chocolate covered, candy coated chocolates. There we go.
Yes, yes, yes. That is insane. Just coming from a person who's just obviously living on ground level, and it's like just the normal things that ends up in space, you know.
Yep. Definitely a lot
So
more fun to play with your food in space, for sure.
yes, yes, yes. Um, Speaking of that picture, the last question on that picture is the fact that the bag is just literally floating. Um,
Yep.
I've heard many people talk about the word microgravity versus zero gravity. So in
Ah,
the
yes.
International Space Station, is that legit zero gravity?
I think officially it's really microgravity, and it's really just a subtle difference between um, we're still connected to the Earth. And so we're not floating out in the middle of space between the planets or beyond our solar system. What we are is we're actually traveling so fast around the Earth that even though we're continuing to fall towards the Earth, like you throw a baseball and it eventually falls back to the ground, if you throw it faster, it goes farther and then hits the ground. So we're just going so fast when we fall, we just keep missing the earth, and it just that's what keeps us going around and around the earth.
Okay, okay. Wow, that's insane. Because I've seen
Yeah,
many
it is.
people like, I've seen I think it was 2014, the ISS opened the NFL draft, and you just saw like the guys
Yep.
using the mic as gravity as a mic stand.
Yes, yeah, you can do that. Things will eventually float away because you always have air currents moving stuff around, and so you can lose stuff really easily if you try and count on just putting something right there because as soon as you need it, it's gone.
Yeah, it makes sense. So let me take the picture down real quick. Um, so we talked a little bit off camera about you starting your love for space at the early ages.
Yep.
What was that moment of like? What was, if you can recall, what was going through your head that
Yeah.
particular day?
Yeah, so I am of an age that I was born in the middle of the first space race to the moon, and so I had just turned 4 years old when we had humans land on the moon for the first time. And I have this very vivid recollection of my parents taking me and my older sister out into our backyard and pointing above our house because we could see the moon coming up over our house, and my parents telling me, I don't know their exact words, but it was basically, "We've got people there." And I was thinking, "I wanna do that." And so ever since I was 4, that was my dream.
That has got to be incredible. So, how does your family after beyond that? How does your family nurture that love of space in you
Yeah,
during
I
that
think
time?
yeah, the whole time, I think, when I first started saying I wanted to be an astronaut, it was probably like, most parents that when their kids are little, they're like, "I wanna be an astronaut, I wanna be a doctor, I wanna be a cowboy," whatever. It's like, "Sure, you can be anything you want." I think, I was really fortunate that my parents didn't bother to tell me that at that time, girls couldn't be astronauts. They weren't allowed. The only people that were allowed to be astronauts were military test pilots, and the only people allowed to be military test pilots were the males, the boys. So they just left that part out and let me just continue on my merry way, and just sort of developing my love of science ever since I was a kid. So I think just having that nurturing environment to say, sure, whatever you want, go for it.
So, besides your parents, who else was encouraging you while you growing up, like teachers, professors, people around the community, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the first go-to was always the teachers. And even if I hadn't had a discussion in particular with the teacher about what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was always the teachers just giving the general encouragement and knowing um, that I thought I had potential to do something. And so they encouraged that and they nurtured that. That, if you continue to do well in school, that's great. If you don't, we'll help you through your struggles and keep you moving forward in whatever direction that is.
So you brought up something that sounds like a lot like career day. So
Yeah,
when I was growing up, a lot of us you heard the things like you want to be a fireman, you want to be a policeman. I was
yep,
one of those ones that said I wanted to be an astronaut.
yep.
What does it feel like when people say essentially they want to be you?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's great, and I think it's a being a role model is something I take very seriously. I think it's important to nurture people's aspirations in whatever form they take. I know I'm very fortunate because so few people get to be an astronaut. But what I tell people, if you want to be an astronaut, uh, you should definitely try. Do not self-select. Do not sit around and wait and say, I'd really like to be an astronaut," because NASA's not going to come looking for you. You've got to tell NASA, this is what I want to do. And I think people need to realize that I spent my whole career working at the Johnson Space Center in the human spaceflight business. I was working here for, I don't know, nearly 20 years or no, 25 years before I was selected as an astronaut. So I was already working in the business that I wanted. And so people should realize, even if they have a love of space and they think they maybe don't want to be an astronaut or realize that it's something that really only a lucky few get to do at this time, they can still be part of the human spaceflight business. And I can tell you that any job you can think of that's happening on Earth, except maybe professional football player, um, is something that NASA does. So we do the science, we do the engineering, but we also have, to train people for spacewalks. We do that in a giant swimming pool. So we have scuba divers that work for us, professional scuba divers. We've got photographers, people in the media. We've got lawyers. We've got doctors. So there's just the gamut of everything that goes on in society. You need all of that to send humans and to keep humans in space.
Yeah, from you mentioning that, something that I was doing a little bit of research on is there are a lot of hands. I know a lot of people just see the the shuttle goes up out into space
Yeah.
or whatnot. But there are a lot of hands that this thing goes through, both on the training side and on actually building the spacecraft itself.
Yes, and I think that's a really good way of putting it. There are a lot of hands, and so there are literal hands building the spacecraft. And where you are, you're really close to Michoud and Stennis, where so much of this hardware is built and tested. And so even if you're like, "Oh, college is not for me," which that's okay. It'd be great if you go to college, but if you decide you want another career path and you're really good with your hands and you want to be a pipe fitter or electrician or something like that, great, because we do that too. And we need that skill set, a really highly qualified skill set at NASA to build our spacecraft.
Exactly, exactly. We have a lot of trades that are down here.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
definitely encouraging to hear that not everybody, I know that some of the misconceptions is everybody is an astronaut in NASA and
Nope.
whatnot, but hearing that you have,
We have everybody. We have
yes,
everybody working at NASA at all levels, and we need everybody and everybody's skill set. And
yes,
everybody, I can assure you, everybody's got something to offer. If they have any hint of wanting to work in any part of the space business, you've got something to offer for sure.
right on. So you were talking about being in the Johnson Space Center. So growing up, basically having the Johnson Space Center in your backyard. I know
Yep.
pretty much all of your schooling was in Houston, whether it was uh, grade
Yeah.
school, high school, college, all of that. How much did having the Space Center literally in your backyard influence you to say, I want to stay here because I want to stay around that constantly?
Yeah, of course, growing up through high school, I didn't have any choice because my parents lived here, and so I was obviously going to live with my parents. But I think it didn't really have that much of influence on where I went to college because I knew I'd already got the information that where you go to school is not nearly as important as your tenacity and getting through school and being good in school. So college just happened to work out that I was going here, living here. But I think it did help having the Johnson Space Center in my backyard and sort of keeping it keeping it always in the back of my mind that maybe that's some place I wanted to work. Sure, I want to be an astronaut, but maybe I wanted to work there anyway if it didn't work out. So it was always just a presence in my life growing up.
Right on, right on. So, you go through the application process, you get the bounce back, which I have to say that is amazing. Just, being in the military and sometimes getting passed off a promotion, it kind of gets you down. And that day after is
Mhm.
like, what am I supposed to do?
Yep.
How did you constantly bounce back from that? Every
Yeah, we should
time.
probably explain to the listeners that I actually applied and got to the final stages 5 times before I was selected. And so I had a lot of years that I kept presenting myself to NASA and they were saying no thanks. It was, I think, between my first application to when I was selected was about 14 years. It's a long time. So yeah, it's hard. But you're right. You sort of have to pick yourself up and say, what now? Am I doing something I like? Yep. Is there something else I can do to make myself more attractive to being an astronaut? And so maybe that meant, I have an opportunity over here. Maybe I'll go do that for a while and see if that sort of increases my ability to be selected. I do want to say that these days, when we're selecting astronauts, we are looking for people with a huge variety of experience. I know people use the word diversity a lot, and that is something we really truly embrace because it is not just um, diverse people in terms of what color they are or what gender they are, but it's being able to have diversity of skill sets within a person. And so if you, let's say you like chemistry and that's your favorite thing and you want to be a chemist, that's great. But if all you are is a chemist, then that's not quite what NASA's looking for. You need a broader set of experiences. And so I would encourage people and kids to think about what goal they want, but realize that in life, especially these days, the path from point A to point B is usually not a straight line. And as long as you sort of wind your way and keep heading towards where you want to go, you're going to be a much better person at your end goal, because you'll have such a wider variety of experiences to bring whatever job you're doing.
So
That
not,
makes sense.
I guess not being specialized would be a definite key.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to develop your natural talents, but don't be afraid to go try do something else. And maybe something else doesn't work out, but you probably learned something along the way. You may have learned where your own limitations are. You may have learned, "Oh, well, I'm not great at that right now, but you know what? If I got this other, training or skills or schooling, maybe I could be good at that and I actually liked it even though I wasn't really good at it right now."
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, and I think you got selected, if memory serves me correctly, in May. So
That sounds
next
about
month,
right.
next month would be the anniversary of
Yeah.
that call. So how many
Yep.
times do you actually look at your acceptance letter? Like, do you look at it like every year, once a year, or?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never had that question before. Um, you know what? I actually don't think about that. I think maybe because like I after getting so many rejection letters over the years, I'm here. I don't want to take it for granted. I'm just gonna go to work in case they change their mind. I'm just gonna go do my job and make sure that they realize they didn't make a mistake.
That's smart. That's smart. So, what's it like to actually train to be an astronaut? What goes into it?
Yeah, training to be an astronaut is interesting. You do so many different things, because we need so many different skills, and because we always hire a diverse set of people. Everybody comes in needing some sort of skill to be developed. Um, a lot of what we do is just like going to school. We sit in a classroom with instructors teaching us the basics about our spacecraft, about orbital mechanics, how you can get spacecraft from one point to the other, how you're going to get to the space station. um, you're going to learn how to do spacewalks, which really involves, first, if you don't know how to scuba dive, we're going to teach you how to scuba dive. Or even before that, if you're not a good swimmer or don't know how to swim, we're going to teach you how to swim. Then we're going to teach you how to scuba dive. And then we're going to put you in this big puffy white suit that weighs several hundred pounds. And we're going to put you underwater in a swimming pool. And we're going to teach you how to do spacewalks. And so it just runs the gamut of everything. And that is just learning how to be a basic astronaut. And then once you're assigned to a flight, you get more of that, more in depth on the spacecraft and the space station. And then you'll start learning about all the science experiments that you might be doing. And so um, you might, whatever it is they expect you to do up there, you'll learn the particulars of that. You also learn some generic skills when it comes to doing science experiments, because sometimes the cargo ships don't show up on time when you expect, and so you don't do exactly what you were trained to do. You've got to have the basic skills to do whatever shows up and what the ground needs you to do. And each day on the space station is different. And that's why we get this huge broad brush of training, because you've got to be able to maintain the space station. So you're doing, all the maintenance like you do at home. Oh, I got to change my filters. Oh, my internet went out. So now I've got to go run some wires. Oh, the plumbing's not working. Boy, you really want your toilet to work. So you got to go fix that. So basic maintenance like that, to the experiments, to the spacewalks, to you name it, to things like this. I was a horribly shy kid growing up. I didn't like talking to people or talking in front of a crowd, but it's part of our job, and so you'll get training in that too. And hopefully, we really do want to be able to tell the story of what NASA is doing, so that, one, people know what we're up to, and knowing that we're trying to be a good steward of all the tax dollars, but then two, encourage people, hey, this is a path for a lot of people. A lot of people work at NASA, and we really want you to come work with us.
Yeah, that does bring up a question. You bring up being at the space station. I know people have, myself included, have all these romanticizing things like, DC, the Watchtower, and all these other different things. But what is the most what is among the most normal things that you all do at the space station?
Oh, I
You
would
know,
say the most normal things we do. Well, I would say dinner around the table at night. We have the space station is a lot bigger than people think. I mean, it's not huge, but it's pretty big, and there's usually 6 or 7 people up there at a time. And there's enough different modules or different rooms in our house up there that you can literally work all day in one room, because that's where the ground control centers need you to be, and not see the rest of your crew. And so at the end of the workday, we will get together and it's like, hey, how was your day? What did you do today? And just sit around and chit chat, just like families do.
yeah, yeah, you were bringing up, the internet goes down, so I got to run more wire and all this other stuff
Yeah,
like that. It was like, seeing pictures of it from the inside and stuff like that. It's like, it almost feels like you're working on the inside of your house
yeah,
and
yeah,
things like that. It almost feels, how do I put this? Fascinatingly normal because
yeah.
you're doing stuff you do in your house, but yet you're doing it in space.
Exactly. That is exactly right. I mean, doing stuff on your house or working in a laboratory or whatever job you have, just imagine doing that, but just floating all the whole time while you're doing it. That's the real difference. And maybe our science that we're doing is a little bit different than the science on the ground. It's still science. And so, yeah, we just do it while we float.
So during that time, is there a time of like quiet contemplation, like the realization that I'm in space? Like I can literally see the earth from outside of my window. And
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
few people on this planet has ever gotten to do something like that.
Yeah, there is. I think one of the best things that the people who built the space station did for the crew was put this wonderful window on the bottom side of the space station that looks down at the Earth. But it's also got this 360 view, so you can see the Earth below you, and then you can see the horizon, kind of like the picture behind me. It was probably taken from the space station. So that's the kind of view you have. And sometimes at night after it's past our bedtime and I'm up past my bedtime, I will go out to the cupola and I'll have all the lights turned out and I'll just sit in the dark and look out at the earth. And that's when it's really really special times where you can reflect on where you are and what you're accomplishing and what you can see going on the earth below you.
There's a line, I think it was in a movie, but there was a line I remember hearing going, "What has Borders ever done for us?" And
Mm-hmm.
considering, you have people from all across the planet going
Yeah.
into the International Space Station. Like I was floored that, there was actually more space programs outside of
Yeah.
us and Russia. I didn't know there was, the robotics ones over in Canada. And,
Yep.
it wasn't only until a few months ago about JAXA and ESA and the rest of
Yeah.
those. But what's it like having such a multicultural team? You talk about like, we're all sitting down and eating. I saw the video of you getting the key to the station
Yep.
and, speaking in different languages and stuff like
Mm.
that. Like how how does that feel when you take a step back and say we have all of these lines that go everywhere, but there's just us that's here and it almost doesn't matter where we're from?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We're all there together on the space station, and it doesn't really matter where we're from. I think what what was really driven home to me not necessarily once I was on the space station, but all the training leading up to my space flights, because you do train all over the world. We will go to Europe. ESA is, like you say, the European Space Agency. Well, that's a conglomeration of like 16 countries that are involved in the European Space Agency. So it's not just one other country. So we'll spend time over there. We'll spend time in Japan, and we spent a lot of time in Russia, especially after for my first flight, and time in Canada. And so what was so obvious to me that, I wanted to be an astronaut since I was a kid. I had this huge passion for human spaceflight, and yet all these people that I work with all over the world are exactly the same. And so it's just like people are people. Yes, we've got our differences, but boy, we've got a whole lot more in common than sometimes the politicians let on. And so it is important to see that all of us, I mean, yes, we're on the space station, but all of us are in this great spacecraft called planet Earth. And we are all a crew on planet Earth. And so we need to live as a crew together instead of dividing up all our territories,
I
in my opinion.
as much as I paid attention to space and stuff, I never really thought of the Earth as a giant spacecraft.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. It is a giant spacecraft. What are we doing? We're going around the sun. And when you think about what's protecting our planet, it's our little bitty atmosphere. And so when you see that from space and you can see how thin our atmosphere really is, I'll see if I can hold up. Like if I were looking out in space, it would look about that thick above the Earth. And so it's not a whole lot. And so just like we have to do maintenance and keep our International Space Station going so we can still live on it, we got to do the same thing and take care of our planet Earth so we can all still live on it together.
Yeah, I mean, this may be I'll just say it, playing a lot of video games, and like one of them I play a lot of times is Starfield, which NASA had a lot of input into that. Going to different planets and realizing, this place has no atmosphere, and even learning
Right.
more and more about space exploration and stuff just through that game. So, which leads me to a question. I don't know if if you're in any version of a gamer, or you watch a lot of movies and stuff, but as a person who has been out into space, when you watch or see a movie about space travel, space flight, blah 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 blah. Are you overly critical of it, or are you one of those ones that's like, kind of see where they're going with it, but
Yeah, it's a combination of the two. I think it's just like the doctors who watch the doctor shows and lawyers who watch the lawyer shows. You're always going to find flaws within it, within the TV show or the movie or the video game, which I have to admit, I'm not a gamer, but like video games were invented when I was a kid. We started off with Pong, and that's what I had, and a little Atari set way back in the day. So I am not up to speed on all the multiplayer, whatever they're called. Uh, Sadly, I don't have time to investigate those. But um, so, you see what's going on. First, you got to take a step back and say, okay, what is this movie? Is it here to be a comedy and entertain me? Is it here to be a drama to make me think about something or give me a sad story? And so, even though the science and engineering may not be quite right, maybe I can just enjoy the story anyway. So I try to not be too critical, but my husband, who is also a former astronaut engineer, we can pick them apart if we really get going.
I hear that. I hear that. So I would be remiss, and I know some of the kids who will be potentially watching this would get on me if I didn't ask, but I believe next week is the solar eclipse.
Yes.
So
Yes.
have you ever seen, and this is a question from Riley, who is 10 years old from Bluff
Mhm.
Ridge Elementary. Have you ever seen a solar eclipse from the ISS?
So, Riley, I have not been fortunate enough to see a solar eclipse from the International Space Station. I have seen a lot of interesting things, and I'll tell you one that may not rival an eclipse, but I think is really cool anyway. There was a time where we were it was nighttime over the United States. So we go around the Earth once every 90 minutes, once every hour and a half. We've gone around the Earth, and so sometimes it's daylight when we're over, whatever portion of Earth, and sometimes it's night. So it's nighttime over the U.S. And I could see on the west coast of the US, it was just covered with these amazing thunderstorms. So you can really see just beautiful lightning shows, especially at night. And there were thunderstorms on the east coast, but it was clear in the middle. So between all these fantastic lightning shows, we were actually going through one of the periodic meteor showers that we do. And so I could see a whole bunch of meteors. But the crazy thing is when you're in space to look at a meteor, you got to look down at Earth because that's where the atmosphere is. You don't look up in the sky to see it.
Wow, that's a good point. I never thought about that. It's like
Yeah,
you have to look down in this
you have
window
to look
to see
down.
meteors pass by while we're stretching our neck to look up at them.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Isn't
is
that crazy?
insane. That is insane. Um, Speaking of looking down, you were also part of, if memory served me correctly, the NEMA 15.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh, and I want to say it got cut a bit short because of a hurricane.
it did.
So
Two hurricanes.
yes.
Yeah,
So looking down at that same window, seeing a hurricane from space,
yeah. Hmm.
like what is that like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So my first space flight, I was up over the period where of hurricane season in the northern hemisphere. And so we saw a lot of hurricanes. And boy, when you're up there in space, you can see how big they are. There was one time, I don't remember, it was Gustav, I don't remember the name of the hurricane. But anyway, we were coming up, sort of approaching the east coast of Florida. So you can tell how big Florida is. And then in the Atlantic Ocean, there's this storm that is as long as the state of Florida is. I mean, it is huge. And then living on the Gulf Coast, like we have, I've experienced hurricanes in Houston, and I'm sure you guys have there as well. So you know how destructive they can be on the ground, but above it, you don't see all that destruction, but you know it's there. And so just seeing the size of them just shows you how powerful they really are.
That's right. Being there, you've seen it, you felt it firsthand,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
but seeing a different perspective of this thing is huge. Because
Yes.
you see it on the news and it's like, oh, it's that big, or you see the symbols and
Right.
stuff, but you don't
Yep.
really, until you see it with your own eyes and you see
Where you,
how much cloud cover is there,
yeah.
you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
the
And
size of
I
this.
mean, it's just kind of crazy where you're up there and you can compare the size of this storm to the size of your continent. It's nuts.
Ah, yeah, that is crazy. So we talked earlier about, um your what did you call it? The bite-sized chocolates?
Oh, the
Uh
candy coated chocolates.
yes, the candy coated chocolates. So I've heard and I've read things about being in space that food kind of tastes a bit different when
Hmm.
you're in the International Space Station. Um, I'm guessing you've had those candies on Earth, but having that same one in the space station, does it taste different? Does it?
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I would say that for every person, how they taste things in space can be different. And I can tell you why I think food tastes differently in space. It's one of these weird space things that happens to your body when you're in space. Well, you're on the ground, walking around, you've got gravity on you, and so everything in your body is pulled towards the ground. And so, as we know, the body's made up of a whole bunch of liquid. And so, when you get in space, it's not being pulled down to your feet like it is on the ground. And so it shifts within your body. And so you can feel like your head is all stuffed up, like you got a cold, and when you get a cold, your sinuses are all stuffed up and things just don't taste quite the same because you need your nose, the senses of your nose to be able to taste the food. And so I would say for me, towards the beginning of a space flight, when you first get up there and your fluids in your body have all adjusted and your head feels fat, stuff isn't going to taste good. After a while, your body's going to say, maybe I don't need all this fluid up in my head, and it'll get rid of it. I'll leave you to your imagination how it does that, but it'll get rid of it. And then food starts tasting a little more normal.
You got it. You got it. So I have a just a couple of more questions because I don't want to run over time um for you. But your time in the International Space Station, being up there, I know it's an amazing experience, but what is the point when you're like, okay, it's time to go
I never actually got to that point. It was kind of for me, it was, towards the end of the 6 months, I felt like if my bosses called me up and said, Shannon, we need you to stay another month or two because we got whatever going on, it'd be okay. But I was ready to be home because I miss my family, I miss my friends. And so I loved what I was doing up in space, and so I'd be happy to stay longer. I'm also happy to come home because it's time to be with Earthlings again.
Yeah. I hear that. So on the way, going back home, like what is reentry like? Because I know from I think I've heard many people say that reentry is even more hair raising than leaving. So when you're
There,
leaving the International Space Station, you're going home. What's that like?
yeah, it's really interesting, and it's different. It was different on the two spacecraft I flew on, but you undock from the space station, and it's almost the same once you undock and you're in spacecraft because you're still floating in space. You're in a smaller space, but you just slowly see the space station move away from you, or you move away from it. Then the fun really starts when you do your engine burn to effectively slow yourself down, so you'll start falling back to Earth. At first, you don't really notice anything, but then once you start getting into the upper atmosphere, it starts getting a little more bumpy, and you're sort of just riding along. You can tell that the earth is getting bigger as you get towards it. But then, as we know, when you're going really fast through the atmosphere, things start to heat up. And so you can tell your spacecraft is getting hotter. You can see stuff kind of burning off your spacecraft, which is really weird, but they're designed to do that. So that's good that they're working. But it's like, I'm kind of on fire here coming through the space, coming through the atmosphere. And it's getting a lot more bumpy and bumpy. And finally, all of that calms down a little bit. Although the windows, you got a couple of windows, they tend to char over, so you can't see as much anymore. But once you get close enough through the atmosphere, then this giant parachute will come out, or four parachutes if you're on a Dragon spacecraft. But on the Soyuz, the Russian spacecraft I flew on the first time, it's one giant parachute. And so that was wild because I felt like, okay, I'm from Houston, Texas. I thought I was riding a mechanical bull. We were bouncing around underneath the parachute. I didn't know how long we'd be bouncing around. I didn't know which way we were going to bounce next, but we were bouncing. And then finally that calms down, and all of a sudden you're just floating underneath the parachute coming back to Earth. So that part's pretty calm. It's quiet, there's not engine noise going on. It's just you and your crewmates sort of taking it all in, that yeah, we're going to be on the ground soon or in the water soon. And then you get ready for the
But
actually hitting the earth part, which is another interesting part. When you hit on land, so the Soyuz lands on land, the Dragon, of course, lands in the water. When you hit on the land, it's kind of like a small car crash. You're really strapped in. You got good seatbelts and everything, but you do kind of bounce when you hit down, and then splashing into the water seemed to be a little bit softer. You kind of just gently sploosh into the water.
I got you. So when you're getting out, now that gravity has once again taken hold and you're so used
Mm-hmm.
to, I weigh next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how long does it take after you leave the craft to where you can actually stand up again?
Yeah, so it's an interesting process. You can stand up. You are physically strong. We exercise every day in space a lot to keep our bones and muscles strong. Um, so when you come back, you are physically strong. What gets people is that your inner ear, which dictates your balance, is really, really confused. It's been in space. You've adjusted to be in space with no up or down, and now it comes back, and it's like, what the hey is going on? And so you're really, really dizzy. It feels like if you've ever played the game Dizzy Bat, where you just like run into circles and then try and walk a straight line. That's what it feels like when you first come back. You're strong, but it's like I don't know how to put one foot in front of the other, and I'm afraid I'm gonna fall over just because I'm so dizzy. And that takes a while to so that it all calms down and you feel more normal. And it depends on the person. It could be hours, it could be days before you feel less dizzy. The other thing is gravity. You are having to walk around now. You never walk around in space except for the time that we run on the treadmill. And so your muscles are sore. So you have a pretty sore body for however long it takes to get over that soreness. So it could be days, weeks, in some cases, months. You kind of get a sore back. I don't know what it is, but I know for a while, at least a month or two after I came back from my first flight, I felt like I must have been 100 years old trying to get out of bed in the morning. It's like, oh, my aching back, but it goes away. And then we're all back to normal.
I got you. I got you. So last two questions I have is saying all of that, what would you tell policymakers about the importance of the NASA mission, and what types of activities do educators, just family members and whatever, need to close the achievement gap in the
Mm,
workforce development, so that
yeah.
more people can be more effective in the NASA sphere?
Yeah, that's good. I think what policymakers need to know, what's important about what we do at NASA, and not just in the human space arena, but all the science and aeronautics that we do here. It really is our mission when it was laid out in the 50s is for the benefit of all humanity. And so that is our goal. So we send humans into space not for the fun of sending humans into space, but to benefit humanity that is on the earth. We would like to be able to go to other planets, maybe it's time to go live somewhere else for whatever reason, and so we want to be able to do that, but we need to understand what it does for humans. We need to explore. Humans innately like to explore. And whether that is getting off this planet, whether that is you're a little bit younger and it's like, you know what? I've never been down to the end of the block by myself. Maybe I just want to go do that. Or, hey, here's this patch of grass and I see all these interesting bugs wandering around in the grass. Let me just try and see what's going on there. We just want to learn stuff. And so NASA's mission is to learn about the universe and figure out how it all relates to what we do here. And then we take all the technology that we develop and we let people use it. We're not keeping any of it for ourselves. If there's like, we were really good at miniaturizing batteries. And so now everybody's got, your cordless drills and your cell phones and everything because of the work that NASA's done. So um, that so there's that aspect of just the basic science and engineering we do that is for benefit. It creates jobs on the ground, which is always very important, highly skilled jobs at all levels. But then also we have the international component, which I think is really important to find ways to bring the world together. And I think the International Space Station does a really good job of that. As far as educators and trying to build to minimize the workforce gap, that is a tricky one because it really comes down to making sure that children have the ability to learn effectively in whatever arena they need to learn. And so um, teachers they have the hardest jobs in the world, but in some cases they have the easiest jobs because they get to spend time with kids and they get to help nurture those passions that are there, or help kids get to, to the next level so they can go on to be productive members of society when they grow up. And so I think the schools are doing great with what they've got, but the policymakers need to understand that none of this is done for free, and it is important to invest in our future, the collective future, not just necessarily the future of this one child, but that child is going to grow up and be part of our society, which is part of our country and the world. And we need everybody to be successful.
Right on, right on. Um, so are there any questions for me, or do you have any parting shots or
No
anything
parting
before
shots.
we you got it. You got it.
No, this
Well,
was
Doc,
great. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope students and the people who might see this podcast or do have an interest and develop that interest in at NASA. Because I'm not kidding when I say we need good people to come work for us. And there's a lot going on in the commercial space business, so there's going to be a whole lot more opportunities than just NASA. So don't limit yourself. The sky is not the limit.
yes, yes, yes. Well, I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for, taking time out of your day to do this interview. Like I said, my 10-year-old self has not stopped screaming. Um, and we have to do this again. There's a lot more questions I would love to
I
ask.
agree.
I love to ask.
I agree. We'll
So
do it again.
thank you, thank you. And with that being said, y'all take it easy.
Yeah, you too. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.